Saint Teresa of Avila, already renowned for her extraordinary mystical experiences, once received a vision that would haunt her more than almost any other she ever recounted. This was no vision of earthly events, no revelation of human politics or worldly concerns. It was a vision of the soul at its most critical and vulnerable moment, the hour of death. In her own words, she was permitted to see the profound danger that awaits a soul that dies without the support of the sacraments, a danger invisible to most, yet all the more real for its invisibility. In the quiet of her prayerful contemplation, Teresa saw a soul approaching the threshold of eternity, trembling, unsteady, and exposed. It was as though the very air around it shimmered with both the potential of divine grace and the threat of spiritual peril. This was not an abstract vision of sin or virtue. It was a revelation of spiritual reality itself, laid bare in the starkest terms. The soul had lived, had experienced joys and trials, but it had neglected the ordinary means of grace offered by God. Confession had been delayed or ignored. The Eucharist had been received without devotion, without the heart fully attuned to God's presence. And now, at the moment when the soul most needed God's fortification, these lifelines were absent. Teresa perceived the soul as a vessel adrift on a stormy sea, the waves of fear, doubt, and regret crashing relentlessly against it. Every hidden sin, every postponed confession, every act of spiritual complacency, each forgotten prayer or half-hearted devotion rose up like a towering wave, pressing against the soul, reminding it of its fragility and isolation. The weight of unrepented faults pressed upon it, a burden too heavy to bear alone. Even as the vision unfolded, Teresa felt the aching reality of the soul's vulnerability, a reality that struck at the heart with both sorrow and urgency. Yet amid the terror of this exposure, Teresa sensed the subtle and persistent presence of God. Mercy reached out to the trembling soul, a quiet light that penetrated the darkness, gentle but unwavering. Even in the absence of the sacraments, God's love did not cease to call. Angels hovered, unseen but palpable, ready to guide, to support, to draw the soul toward salvation. But their aid could not be fully received. The soul itself had to turn, had to accept what was offered. Teresa understood that grace requires cooperation. God's mercy is never withheld, but it cannot be forced into a heart that has neglected its ordinary channels. This vision, she realized, was not given merely to frighten, but to awaken. It was a call to attentiveness, a summons to recognize the power of the sacraments, the urgency of confession, the strength found in the Eucharist, and the preparation that prayer offers in life. It revealed the stark truth that death is not a distant, abstract event. It is a confrontation with the unseen, a moment when the soul's choices throughout life bear their ultimate consequences. To approach it unprepared is to face forces far beyond human strength, to confront eternity without the fortification God provides. Teresa's heart quaked as she beheld this vision. She saw the soul's fragility mirrored in her own, recognizing that none are immune to the dangers of neglecting grace. And yet, she also saw hope. Even for a soul that had strayed, mercy remained. The vision called for vigilance, for prayer, for the faithful embrace of the sacraments. It urged preparation, not despair, awareness, not fear alone. For in understanding the peril of dying unprepared, the living can take steps to ensure that their own souls and the souls of those they love are fortified, nourished, and guided toward the light. As the vision concluded, Teresa felt a mixture of awe, sorrow, and resolve. The scene she had witnessed was both terrifying and illuminating. It was a lesson in the reality of grace, the necessity of the sacraments, and the urgency of spiritual preparedness. The soul, she realized, is fragile in its mortal vessel, yet strong when united to God through the means He provides. To ignore those means is to face death unarmed. To embrace them faithfully is to meet eternity with courage, clarity, and peace. Teresa's vision grew darker, more intense, as she watched the soul struggle in its final hour. It was a struggle not just of fear or regret, but of spiritual vulnerability so profound that it seemed to stretch across eternity itself. The soul, she saw, was weighed down by every unconfessed fault, every secret selfishness, every sin committed in shadow, each one clinging to it like iron chains. These were sins long ignored, sins rationalized or hidden even from oneself, sins repeated out of habit or convenience, and now their weight pressed upon the soul with the urgency of impending judgment. Without the Eucharist, the soul was starved of the very strength it would need to endure the trials of death. The bread of life, the divine nourishment that sustains souls through their mortal journey, was absent. Teresa saw the soul flail, weak and trembling, unable to stand against the forces it had ignored in life. The trials it now faced were not hypothetical or symbolic. They were the spiritual reality of death, unprepared, raw, and immediate. Around the soul hovered angels, radiant yet restrained. They were the gentle servants of God, ever ready to guide and protect, but they seemed bound by the soul's own choices. Teresa understood that grace is offered freely, yet it requires cooperation. Angels could whisper prayers, extend divine aid, and plead for the soul to open itself to mercy, but they could not force a heart that had turned inward, that had ignored the instruments God provided for its sanctification. The absence of sacramental grace created a space, and into that space poured fear, darkness, and the pressure of every neglected responsibility, every unresolved sin. Teresa felt a sorrow unlike any she had known. She realized that this was the fate of those who approach death without the sacraments. They are left exposed, their souls defenseless against the weight of sin and the unknown trials of eternity. Death is not merely a passing of time, it is a crossing into the unseen, a moment when spiritual reality presses upon the soul with unimaginable clarity. Without preparation, without confession to cleanse the heart, without the Eucharist to fortify it, the soul is left vulnerable, like a vessel adrift in a storm with no anchor. And yet, even in this terrifying scene, Teresa glimpsed a flicker of hope. She saw that God's mercy does not cease. It continues to call, to reach out even when the soul has ignored it. The angel's whispers were faint but persistent, urging the soul to turn, to seek forgiveness, to open itself to grace. Divine aid is always present, but its effect depends entirely upon the soul's openness and willingness to receive it. Teresa realized that mercy unreceived is mercy ineffective, and that neglecting the sacraments diminishes the soul's ability to respond to the call of God in that final critical moment. She saw the stark contrast. A soul fortified by grace could face death with calm courage, illuminated from within by the presence of God, while a soul deprived of it flailed in darkness, exposed to fear, confusion, and spiritual peril. The lesson was undeniable. The sacraments are not empty rituals, nor are they optional ceremonies to be delayed until convenience allows. They are lifelines, the very means by which God's mercy strengthens, protects, and prepares the soul for the hour when life and eternity meet. Teresa trembled as she beheld this reality. It was not horror for horror's sake, but a revelation of divine logic. Without preparation, death becomes a trial far more fearful than the living can comprehend. Without grace, the soul is left to confront its sins, its fears, and its ultimate destiny alone. And yet, mercy persists. Even for the unprepared, God reaches toward them, calling, whispering, waiting. But it is the soul's responsibility to respond, to take hold of the lifelines offered through confession, the Eucharist, and prayer. She understood that this vision was meant not only for her, but for all souls. It was a warning, a reminder, and an exhortation. Neglect the sacraments at your peril, for they are the instruments of God's mercy, the armor against the darkness, and the preparation for the moment that comes for all, without exception. To live without them, to approach death without their aid, is to enter a trial that few can endure. And yet, to receive them with devotion, to open the heart fully, is to be fortified, strengthened, and illuminated in the presence of God Himself. Teresa's soul shuddered at the sight, but in that shuddering, a deeper clarity emerged. The absence of grace was terrifying, because it revealed the full seriousness of human choice, the consequences of neglect, and the weight of sin. It was a stark reminder that God's mercy is freely given, but it requires cooperation. The sacraments are the ordinary, visible means through which that mercy strengthens the soul. Without them, the journey toward eternity becomes perilous. With them, the soul is armed, illuminated, and at peace. And so, Teresa beheld the soul in its struggle, flailing and trembling, exposed yet reached by mercy. The vision was a lesson, a warning, a call. The sacraments are not optional, they are necessary. Their absence is a peril far more real than most ever imagine, and their presence is a gift that fortifies the soul for eternity. In vivid detail, Teresa's vision revealed the soul's desperate struggle as it approached the final hour of life. She saw it flailing, reaching out, yearning for support, yet finding none where it had ignored grace in life. Every moment of hesitation, every postponed confession, every Eucharist received without true devotion had left a gap in the soul's defenses. And now, at the critical moment, that absence of preparation became painfully evident. The demons lingered close, not in some distant, abstract sense, but with a palpable presence that pressed upon the soul. They did not need to force their way in. The lack of sacramental grace had already left the soul vulnerable. It was as though every unrepented sin, every lapse of spiritual diligence, acted like an open door, a silent invitation for darkness to enter. The soul quivered under the weight of what it had ignored in life, and the horror of exposure was almost unbearable. Yet even in this terrifying scene, Teresa perceived the mercy of God, faint but unmistakable, threading through the darkness. Angels hovered nearby, their presence gentle yet urgent. They called to the soul, whispering prayers, guiding, encouraging, pleading for it to turn toward light. But the soul, weakened by years of neglect, was unable to fully respond. Its grasp for help faltered, its longing for protection hampered by its own past choices. Teresa realized with profound sorrow that divine mercy is always offered, but it must be received. Grace requires cooperation, a turning of the heart toward God, even in the final moments. She understood that the sacraments are the ordinary, visible channels through which God's grace flows. Baptism initiates the life of grace. Confession restores it when it is lost. The Eucharist nourishes and strengthens it, and the last rites prepare the soul for its ultimate journey. To ignore them is not merely to be negligent, it is to stand unarmed before the most formidable trial of existence. Death is no longer a distant event. It is a confrontation with spiritual realities too vast for the human mind to fully comprehend. Teresa shuddered as she beheld the soul's struggle. She saw that sin and negligence are not abstract or theoretical. They have real, eternal consequences. Each soul that approaches death without sacramental preparation faces a trial of immense weight, a confrontation that can overwhelm even the most courageous of hearts. And yet, she also perceived that the fear of such a moment is not intended to induce despair, but to awaken the living to the necessity of vigilance. Spiritual preparation is not optional, it is essential. The sacraments are the lifeblood of the soul's journey toward God, the armor that shields it from the trials of death, and the means through which divine grace fortifies human weakness. The vision lingered in her mind, the soul struggling, the demons pressing, the angels hovering, mercy extended but unreceived. Teresa understood that every delay in confession, every Eucharist received without true devotion, every act of spiritual complacency is magnified in that final hour. The soul may seek help, but if it has ignored the lifelines God offered throughout life, that help arrives too late to fully protect it. The horror of this moment is real, not for punishment's sake, but to reveal the stakes of every decision, every choice to embrace or neglect God's mercy. And so, Teresa saw the truth inescapably. The struggle of the soul at death is both a warning and a lesson. It teaches that grace, though freely given, must be welcomed, that the sacraments are not mere rituals, but the very instruments by which God strengthens, protects, and prepares the soul for eternity. To approach death without them is to enter the final trial unarmed, vulnerable, and exposed to spiritual realities beyond mortal understanding. But to embrace them, to receive them faithfully, is to face eternity fortified, illuminated, and at peace in the mercy of God. As Teresa reflected on the vision, a profound clarity settled over her. The terrifying scene she had witnessed was not only a warning, but a lesson embedded within God's mercy itself. She saw that even in the absence of sacramental grace, God's love continues to reach toward the soul. It does not abandon, it does not turn away, and it does not relent. Yet this love, powerful and infinite, is mediated through the sacraments. Without them, the soul cannot fully receive, cannot truly open itself to the life-giving presence of God. The mercy that could have fortified it remains ungrasped, unutilized, leaving the soul vulnerable, not because God has withheld, but because the soul has refused the ordinary, tangible channels of his aid. This truth struck Teresa with awe and fear. She saw why the Church has always emphasized confession, the Eucharist, and the last rites. These are not ceremonial gestures, nor empty traditions handed down without meaning. They are divine lifelines, the instruments through which God strengthens, restores, and prepares the soul for the moment it must cross from time into eternity. In her vision, the soul's struggle became a vivid illustration of what happens when these lifelines are ignored. The absence of the sacraments left the soul exposed to spiritual perils far beyond ordinary human perception. The fear, the darkness, the weight of unrepented sin, all of it pressed upon the soul with a force that no human effort alone could withstand. Teresa's insight deepened as she observed the subtle dynamics of divine mercy. Even when unreceived, grace continues to call. Angels hover, prayers are whispered. Opportunities for repentance present themselves, but if the soul does not turn, the protection remains unfulfilled. She realized that preparation, confession, prayer, and devotion are not optional adornments of spiritual life. They are the very instruments by which God's mercy reaches the human heart, fortifying it against the trials of death and the assaults of darkness. To neglect them is to confront the final hour weakened, unshielded, and trembling in the face of what lies beyond. Her vision revealed yet another truth. The closer a soul is to God in life, the more urgent the need for grace. Those who live near the sacraments, who approach them with devotion, who receive them faithfully, are strengthened to resist temptation, to persevere in holiness, and to stand firm at the hour of death. But those who neglect them, even if outwardly pious or devout in appearance, face great danger. Appearances, she saw, cannot substitute for grace. The sacraments are bridges to God's presence, and to attempt to cross that bridge unprepared is to confront the final moment with fear, weakness, and vulnerability. Teresa's heart trembled as she understood this. The vision was not only a warning, but a call to vigilance, a plea for souls to embrace the merciful lifelines God provides. The sacraments are not burdens to be postponed, nor are they privileges to be treated casually. They are the instruments of salvation, the divine means by which grace strengthens and purifies, by which the soul is prepared to face eternity with courage, clarity, and peace. And yet, within this warning, there was also a profound consolation. God's mercy is unending, always reaching, always inviting, even to those who have strayed. The soul may be unprepared, may tremble, may feel the weight of sin pressing down, but grace never ceases to knock. The vision revealed that it is the cooperation of the soul, its willingness to receive, to open itself, to embrace the sacraments, that allows divine mercy to take full effect. It is a partnership. God provides, the soul responds. The tragedy is in the refusal. The triumph is in acceptance. Teresa saw, with sorrow and compassion, that this warning was meant for all. Every soul that approaches life with negligence risks the peril she witnessed. Every postponed confession, every Eucharist received without devotion, every moment of spiritual laziness or pride can leave the soul vulnerable when it stands before the threshold of eternity. The lesson is simple yet profound. The sacraments are not optional. They are lifelines, fortresses of grace, bridges to God. To neglect them is to face the unthinkable unprepared. To embrace them faithfully is to meet eternity strengthened, illuminated, and at peace in the infinite mercy of God. From that day forward, Teresa carried the vision in her heart as a quiet but insistent weight, a reminder that the soul's journey toward God is fragile and must be tended with care. She did not see it as a distant lesson, but as a living reality that touched every moment of her life. She prayed not only for herself, but for all souls, particularly for those approaching death, those caught in the routine of life, or those who had grown complacent in their faith. She understood that the most profound mercy one can offer another is not simply words or advice, but prayer, intercession that strengthens the soul, awakens the conscience, and reminds the living of the spiritual lifelines God provides. Teresa realized that grace is not abstract. It is received in very real, tangible ways. The sacraments, confession, the Eucharist, and the last rites, are the ordinary means by which God's mercy enters human life. To treat them as routine, optional, or burdensome is to close the door to the very help God has promised. The vision she received was a stark warning. Delay or neglect in embracing these instruments of grace leaves a soul vulnerable at the most critical hour. Death is not a theoretical event. It is a confrontation with reality, and a soul unfortified by sacramental grace is unarmed, exposed to spiritual forces that it cannot resist on its own. Yet even in the gravity of this warning, Teresa discerned hope. God's mercy does not abandon, but it requires cooperation. Prayer, confession, and communion are not burdens. They are the very channels through which the soul is strengthened to face eternity with courage, hope, and peace. She saw that those who embrace the sacraments faithfully, who receive them with devotion and humility, approach death not in fear, but in light. Their souls are fortified, anchored in God's love, prepared to meet eternity unafraid. The difference, Teresa understood, is profound. Grace received becomes strength, illumination, and courage. Grace ignored becomes a missed opportunity, leaving the soul exposed and trembling. Her vision also carried a lesson for the living, a call to vigilance that transcends time. We cannot know the hour when our souls, or the souls of those we love, will stand before eternity. Every day, every decision, every act of devotion or negligence shapes how we meet that moment. To pray, to confess, to receive the Eucharist with care, is to fortify the soul, to weave threads of grace into its fabric, so that when the final hour arrives, it stands ready, illuminated by the love of God. So tonight, let this vision remain with you. Let it awaken seriousness in your heart, a reverent attentiveness to confession, communion, and prayer. Remember that the sacraments are real, powerful, and necessary. They are not mere rituals, but the instruments of God's mercy, the lifelines that guide the soul safely to its eternal home. Pray for your own soul. Pray for the souls of others. Offer intercessions for those who are approaching death, for those who may be unaware of the peril of neglecting grace. Let your prayers be a shield, a conduit of mercy, and a witness to the urgency of preparation. And never forget the terrifying truth that Saint Teresa saw. Dying without the sacraments leaves a soul vulnerable, unshielded, and exposed to realities far greater than mortal comprehension. But a soul fortified by grace, nourished by confession, strengthened by the Eucharist, and prepared by prayer, meets eternity unafraid. It stands illuminated by God's mercy, secure in His love, and at peace in the knowledge that divine grace has been received, embraced, and made its own. Let this call to vigilance remain with you. Let it shape the way you live, the way you pray, the way you receive the sacraments, and the way you intercede for others. For in this, as Teresa saw, lies the profound truth. Grace is the lifeline, the bridge to God, and the safeguard of the soul when it must finally meet the eternal.